Marrying the love of my deceased best friend's life. Alina and I had been best friends for as long as I could remember. We met in fourth grade when she lent me her extra pencil during an exam, and from that moment, we were inseparable. Where she was loud, I was quiet. Where she was wild, I was careful. She was the kind of person who pulled you into trouble, but somehow always got you out of it too. And then there was Ryan. Ryan and Alina were one of those pairs that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. He was serious, reserved, always the observer, never the one to take the first step. Alina, on the other hand, never stopped moving, never stopped pulling people into her orbit. He grounded her and she made him lighter. It was strange seeing them together, but it was also impossible to imagine them apart. I remember the night she died. They found her body the next day, floating near the rocks. The police said she drowned, an accident, but I couldn't understand how. She had always loved the water. She was the strongest swimmer I knew. At her funeral, Ryan barely spoke. He just stood there, stiff and pale, like he was waiting for something. Like maybe if he stood still enough, none of it would be real. I wished I could do the same, but the silence she left behind was unbearable. I kept looking at my phone, waiting for her name to pop up. I kept expecting her to walk into my room, throw herself onto my bed, and complain about something meaningless. The world moved on, but I didn't. I didn't know how to. Grief is a strange thing. People talk about it like it's this heavy weight you carry, something you can feel pressing down on you. But for me, it was the opposite. It was emptiness. Alina had filled so much space in my life that when she was gone, everything felt hollow. I still caught myself looking over my shoulder, expecting to see her grinning at me. I still thought I heard her laugh in crowded rooms. I kept my phone on silent because I couldn't stand the way it never rang with her name anymore. I thought Ryan felt it too. At first, we barely spoke after the funeral. He disappeared into himself and I let him. Maybe I thought it was better that way. But grief is lonely. It isolates you, makes you feel like you're the only one left behind. One night, almost 6 months after she was gone, I found myself dialing his number. "Hey," I said when he picked up. "Hey." Neither of us said much after that, but we stayed on the line, the silence between us heavier than words. It became a habit. Calls that lasted for hours without real conversation, sitting together in quiet spaces, lost in separate thoughts, but somehow less alone. I told myself it was just that, loneliness. But then there were the small things, the way he always waited for me after class, the way he noticed when I hadn't been sleeping well, the way he looked at me sometimes, like he was searching for something in me that he had lost. I knew what it was, and I hated that I felt it too. For a long time, I fought it, because Ryan wasn't mine to love, he was Alina's, and even though she was gone, it still felt like I was betraying her. Like if I let myself feel anything for him, I was taking something that was never meant to be mine. But feelings don't just go away because you tell them to. And neither did he. It took 2 years of stolen glances, of late night conversations, of guilt that sat between us like a shadow, 2 years of pretending we didn't know what was happening. And then one evening, he took my hand. Neither of us said a word, but we knew. And for the first time in years, the emptiness didn't feel so unbearable. Loving Ryan was easy. It scared me how easy it was. I had spent so long convincing myself that we were only together because of grief, because we both missed the same person, because we understood each other in a way no one else could. But that wasn't true. The more time we spent together, the more I realized how much we just fit. Ryan was the sweetest person I had ever known. He noticed things about me that I didn't even notice about myself. How I hummed when I was lost in thought, how I tapped my fingers against my wrist when I was anxious. He memorized my coffee order, sent me pictures of stray cats because he knew they made me smile. We kept everything between us a secret. Maybe we were afraid of what people would say. Maybe we were afraid of what we would say if we acknowledged it out loud. Because naming it, admitting that we were together, made it real. And if it was real, it meant we had truly moved on. It meant we had left her behind. The nightmares started not long after. At first, they were just flashes. Alina's face, pale and wet, her hair clinging to her skin. Then they got worse. She stood at the foot of my bed, staring at me with empty eyes. "You took him," she whispered. I woke up gasping, my hands shaking. I told myself it was just guilt, just my mind playing tricks on me. But then one morning my phone rang. It was Alina's mother. Sweetheart, she said softly. Could you come over? I hadn't been to their house in over a year. After Alina's death, I visited a few times, sitting in her old room, touching the things she left behind. But it had been so long now. Too long. Of course, I said. But as I hung up, a strange feeling settled in my chest. I didn't tell Ryan I was going. I wasn't sure why. Maybe because deep down, I knew he'd tell me not to. Maybe because something about that phone call had left a strange weight in my chest, something I didn't want to explain. So I drove there alone. Alina's house looked the same. It always did. The same wind chimes at the door, the same potted plants her mother tried so hard to keep alive. But something felt different. Or maybe I was the one who had changed. Her mother opened the door, her expression unreadable. Not quite sad, not quite relieved, something in between. She led me inside and sat me down on the couch. We talked for a while, about nothing and everything, how she had been coping, how the house felt emptier without Alina. I nodded, murmured words of comfort, but guilt gnawed at me. I had barely kept in touch. Sitting there now, I almost felt like I didn't deserve to be in that house anymore. Then she sighed, her hands tightening around something in her lap. I need to tell you something. She placed a small book on the table, a diary. It's Alina's, she said quietly. I reached for it, my breath catching in my throat. The cover was worn, the edges curled from use. I knew everything Alina owned, every necklace, every book, every stupid little keychain she kept on her bag. But I didn't recognize this. She had marked certain pages for me to read. I hesitated, then opened it. The handwriting was hers. I would have known it anywhere. And as I began to read, my hands started to shake. I kept reading, though every word felt like a dagger. Alina had been obsessed with Ryan. It wasn't love, it was something desperate, something consuming. She wrote about how she needed him, how she saw their future before it even existed, how she had waited for him to notice her. But then he noticed me. I couldn't take it. I felt a pit in my stomach. She had lied to Ryan, lied about me. She called me cheap, said I led men on. She told him I was easy, that I used people, that I was nothing like the girl he thought I was, and he had believed her. Because Alina could be convincing. When she wanted something, she made it happen. And she had wanted Ryan. So he had chosen her. I swallowed hard and kept reading. Ryan had realized the truth, slowly. It took months, but he had started to see through her. He noticed the way I spoke, the way I carried myself, the way it didn't match the stories she told. And 3 days before she died, he had broken up with her. I felt dizzy. The final entry was scrawled across the page, the ink darker, the words uneven. I love him. I love him. I love him. But he doesn't love me. And I can't take it. I stopped breathing. The date, she had written this before she went to the lake. A choked sound left my throat. I slammed the diary shut. I couldn't do this. For years, I had mourned her, grieved her. I had cried on Ryan's shoulder, whispered apologies to a ghost, felt guilty for moving on. But what was I mourning? Who had I been crying for? The Alina I knew, the best friend I had loved. I thought you should know, her mother said softly. I gripped the diary, my nails pressing into the worn leather cover. No? Know what? That the girl I had spent years missing had spent her final days resenting me? That she had tried to ruin me, then destroyed herself instead? Why couldn't she just tell me everything? We could have gotten through this together. After all, we were best friends. But instead, she chose to hate me, to plot against me. It hurt. It truly hurt. That night, I couldn't sleep. I was angry with Ryan. No, I was furious. How could he keep this from me? How could he let me grieve her like that, love her memory, while knowing the truth all along? He had known everything, hadn't he? He knew what she did, what she wrote. And still, he never told me. If he had told me, it's not like I would have hated her, but at least it would have eased my guilt about my relationship with Ryan. Just a little. My phone kept ringing. Ryan, over and over, but I refused to answer. I ignored his messages, his voicemails. I couldn't even bring myself to type a single response. Because what could I say? That I hated him for keeping this secret? That I hated myself for still wanting to hear his voice? I fell asleep crying that night. And when the sun rose, I wasn't sure if it was exhaustion or something else, but for the first time in weeks, I didn't dream of Alina. I thought it would make me feel better. It didn't. Ryan showed up at my door the next afternoon. I didn't let him in. I didn't even greet him. I just stood there, my arms crossed tightly over my chest. Why didn't you tell me everything about Alina? Were you ever planning on doing so? I asked. My voice was sharp, but my throat burned like I had swallowed glass. He exhaled. I was. You were? My voice rose, my anger bubbling up again. Ryan, I spent 2 years feeling guilty for loving you. I had nightmares about her. I swallowed hard. His face darkened and he stepped closer, his voice low. And you think I didn't? I opened my mouth to argue, but he kept going. You weren't the only one who lost her, he said. I dated her. I loved her, or at least I thought I did. And then I found out who she really was. She broke me, too, but then he faltered, rubbing his face with both hands. She died, I whispered. She died, he echoed. His eyes met mine. And I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to be the one to ruin the way you remembered her. I let his words sink in. I had been so caught up in my own pain, in my own betrayal, that I never thought about what it must have been like for him, to have been manipulated, to have spent those last days trying to untangle himself from her web, only for her to disappear forever. He must have felt guilty, too, maybe even worse. I inhaled sharply, suddenly feeling exhausted. I wish you had told me. I know, he said, but I was scared you'd look at me differently. I stared at him, feeling something shift inside me. The anger wasn't gone, but it wasn't sharp anymore. It dulled into something else, something heavier. Because I realized, deep down, I didn't really hate him. I didn't forgive him immediately. It took time, but eventually I answered his calls again. We talked, we healed slowly, and the nightmares, they stopped. Years passed. Ryan and I finished our studies, built our careers, and settled into a life that finally felt like ours. A life without secrets, without guilt. And yet, when the time came to tell the world about us, I was terrified. People had whispered about us before, back when we were just friends who lingered too long in conversations, who seemed to understand each other too well. I knew what they would think, what they would say. That I had stolen him, that I had waited for Alina to be gone, that I had betrayed her, even in death. Ryan knew my fears. He held my hand in those quiet moments, his fingers warm and steady. We don't owe anyone an explanation, he said. We loved her and we lost her, but that doesn't mean we're not allowed to love again. I wanted to believe him, and when we finally told everyone, I realized he was right, at least partly. Some people were happy for us. Others were hesitant, their eyes flickering with unspoken thoughts. And then there were ones who didn't hide their disapproval. But the person I feared facing most was Alina's mother. She had lost her daughter. Would she see me as a thief? As someone who had stepped into Alina's place, taken the life she should have had? But when we told her, she only sighed, her gaze soft yet distant, as if looking at something beyond us. I always thought Ryan would be part of this family one way or another, she said quietly. I just never knew how. She didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. She simply reached out, squeezed my hand, and said, I hope you find happiness. It felt like a blessing, and yet it didn't. Because standing there in her dimly lit living room, I felt the weight of the past pressing against my chest. Alina's photographs still lined the walls, her face frozen in time, smiling as if she knew a secret the rest of us didn't. The wedding. It was small. Simple. I didn't want a grand ceremony, didn't want to wear a dress that felt like a weight on my shoulders. I wanted something light, something easy, something mine. Ryan and I exchanged vows under an autumn sky, the air crisp and golden. I smiled at him and he smiled back, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. As I stood there, fingers wrapped around Ryan's, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. Not in a menacing way. Not like the nightmares. It was different. It was gentle. A breeze passed through, rustling the leaves, and for the briefest moment I thought I heard laughter. Alina's laughter. I turned my head, but there was no one there. Just the sky. Just the trees. Just a feeling, lingering like a breath on my skin. A part of me wanted to believe it was her blessing. A part of me wasn't sure. Moving forward, I still dream of her sometimes. Not the nightmares. Those stopped long ago. Now it's just glimpses. Moments, a flash of her sitting across from me, twirling her hair the way she used to, the sound of her voice saying my name. And as for me and Ryan, we left everything behind. The whispers, the lingering gazes, the memories that clung to every street corner. We left it all. We moved to Poland, far from the past, far from the people who would always see us as something tragic, something tainted. Here, we were just another couple, just two people in love, walking down cobblestone streets, building a home where no ghosts lingered. Ryan found work easily, and I did too. Our life became quiet, simple, peaceful. And for the first time in years, I felt light. No guilt clawing at the edges of my mind, just mornings wrapped in Ryan's arms, just laughter over dinner, just a life that felt normal. And yet sometimes when the wind shifts just right, when the air carries the scent of autumn, I close my eyes and feel it. A presence, distant but not unkind, a whisper of something that once was. I no longer fear it, I no longer run from it, because for the first time in a long, long time, I am happy. And my oh so perfect husband, he is too. Until next time, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and don't forget to subscribe. You never know what's hiding in the dark.